Good morning. We are starting an hour late, but we are good to go. So as usual, of course, you guys are used to Bitok being in this particular seat, but my name is ARNOLD MALIBA. I'll be standing in for Gerald Bitok, who is away tending to other needs. We need to start with prayer, as we've always done. I don't know whether Kevin, unaweza ombea sisi leo?
Sinaomba tu.
Omba.
Yeah. So then let's pray. Father in heaven, we come to you this morning to thank you so much for your goodness to us and for the joy that you give to us when we meet and when we talk about our country and the issues that bedevil us. So we commit this show into your hands, even as we commemorate the International Peace Day today. And we've come here to talk about security issues and the lives around the people of the Republic of Kenya and the global community. We pray that your spirit shall guide us, lead us, and give us a knowledge so that we will be able to impact the lives of the people who are watching us and those who are tuned in. Pray that you start with us and end with us. In Jesus' name I pray.
Amen.
Amen.
So thanks so much for the prayers. I think Kevin has been our pastor today. Ameomba kama mchungaji kabisa kabisa. Yeah, so I'll do an introduction, just a round one. Starting on the other side, of course, Kevin prayed for us. He can actually do an introduction of himself.
Yeah, my name is Kevin OSIDO. I serve as the executive director of an organization called County Governance Watch, which is a non-government organization that engages with county governments and national government agencies and departments that relate to devolution. And so our core business is to watch over counties, how they engage with the public, the citizens in issues around public participation, issues around leadership and governance of the counties, and largely the budget process. So we are here to also talk about a number of issues that relate to the leadership and governance of our country. Thank you for the opportunity.
Welcome, Kevin. MUSAU.
Thank you. My name is Prince MUSAU. I am an ex-army intelligence officer. I have served in the Kenya Defence Forces for 7 years, calling it quits in December 2015. I'm a professional writer and author. I've written 3 books. The first one is The Broken Snare. The second one, A Journey of Hope in Uncertain Times. And currently, Tales of the War Front, which gives a soldier's experience in the battlefield, which we are set to release on 1st October this year.
So today is, of course, the International Day of Peace. But over and above, of course, on this particular set, we do a lot of politics. Today we probably a little bit of deviate. You know, for the last 6 months or so, probably a whole year, we've been doing politics every day. And people get a little bit of fatigue listening to politics every single... We are a politicking nation. So today as much as we look at the current affairs, today we actually thought that we dedicate this particular show to 2 themes. Number one, of course, the International Day of Peace. And then closely embedded to that is an experience as a nation we had 9 years ago, that at about noon on 21st of 2013 September, a day like this 9 years ago, we had the unfortunate terror attack that happened at Westgate. Kevin was there. He's among the civilian guys. If you remember the people who were serving people food, continuously taking care of the soldiers, Kevin was there. Of course, I happened to know him even then. MUSAU, of course, was there on the other end. This show is actually just, we are going to look at a throwback at that for 2 main reasons. Reason number one is because it's not just because it's 9 years, but then Jubilee was very new. It was a nascent government. And 9 years down the line, of course, we have got a new government coming in. So we will look back from where we were, because in many ways, the Westgate attack is our 9/11. Of course, not necessarily in the gravity, but in the way we woke up as a nation and how Uhuru's presidency has been shaped for the last 9 years, and the way the country has actually ended up. This is our 9/11. So we will want to look at it, of course. By and large, we are not looking at operational details. We will look at policy, of course, a few things here and there. Normally, from a counterterrorism approach, there's always the word that we don't reveal sources, we don't say so much because we are protecting sources and methods. Yeah. So generally, we have to look at where we've come from as a nation. Tuangalie kama nchi tumetembea namna gani. But then today, Kenya generally is so much shaped. If you talk about, you had the term about securitizing politics or politicizing security. Much of that actually stems from what happened at Westgate in that day in September 2013. So that's where we start. Kevin, your experience then, you just walk us back. I remember seeing you serving the people, serving the soldiers, going back home. I think at that particular time you lived close by there.
Yes, correct.
And you go home, cook food, bring in for the soldiers, take care of everything else. And at that particular point, we will be getting into the technical issues later on, but from where we've come from. And I need to mention this just before you start. Today, of course, across the country, our security apparatus are on alert because naturally what has happened in the past is that terrorist organizations have got a tendency of also holding what we call memorial attacks on those particular days, and they will actually try to actually do that. So the security officers, you look around, you will also see that there is a heightened presence of security officers as usual. Secondly, also, it's just important that as a person, you also watch out. Uhuru told us then, security begins with you. It's always important that you also check out that. I'll be trying to read the comments on our social media, hoping that I can have an interface that reads them. Bitoko pale penye huko utume password ya kusoma comments. So,
thank you so much, Arnold. Actually, this is a very, very important conversation that we are having today because, as you rightfully said, it's a day of remembrance, a day of memory. It's a historic day because as we talk about nine years of Kenya's vigilance on issues around counterterrorism and prevention of violent extremism, that particular day for me marked quite a turnaround because, as you said, I lived at Peponi Road 7, the black gate that is right opposite Westgate, block number 24, that's block 2, room 4. And when I first saw the crowd around Westgate, of course I was not there at that particular point in time that Saturday because I had gone to seek some medical assistance in terms of talking to a dentist on Koinange Street. And when ultimately the breaking news came up and I started calling my friends who are security officers, friends who are working at Westgate, at Art Cafe and at Java and at the bank there, the manager, initially the thought was that it was actually a terrorist attack, a bank robbery, because other than the 1998 bomb blast, we had not seen quite a very engrossed, a very security active sort of presence and response like what we saw on that particular day. But as things turned around, as things kept going, I left town and I decided to go back home. And it was impossible because of traffic. There was a heavy presence of the police, administration police and traffic police because of traffic issues that was basically going on. Ambulances running left, right, and center. And people were like, what's really going on? The media was already beginning to be quite actively involved in terms of picking the news and all that. So luckily enough, because I knew some of those security officers in the event of them, in the process of asking people to leave, they allowed me to walk in to Westgate, and Maliba, what I saw really shocked me because there were bodies of people lying there, blood oozing from people's bodies, and it was really quite a sad day. It was really a difficult moment. Now, there was a bit of confusion in terms of response because we had all manner of police officers. We had all manner of people, holding guns, even private licensed gun holders who are also present. And at this point in time, there was still a bit of some shooting going on because it was suspected that 4 of those terrorist attacks were still held in one of the tunnels inside Westgate. And so as at the time when the entire operation was done and over, particularly when the Reke team arrived, because when I arrived, I almost arrived at the same time with them. And I saw the manner in which they were able to take control, just a small number of people, but the degree of the skill set, the degree of awareness of the environment in terms of even their coordination, two of them asking for the map of Westgate and positioning themselves. And in a span of about 22 minutes, the whole operation was done. And bodies, of some of the suspects were there. And of course, now then it was Mr. Olelenku, who was our cabinet secretary for Interior, came over and then, of course, details for the press and all that. But for me, moving on in terms of Westgate operations, there are things that I saw from the hearts of Kenyans and which border on the ability to just come over and assist, volunteer and help, because as the neighbors of Westgate, we put together a team which was called the Purple Cross. So the Purple Cross was a volunteer team of 8 of us. We had a group of Indian community who also live there. And so we made a dedication that for the next about 28 days, until October 18th, when the entire operation was folded, and the governor then, Kidero, came and said, we are setting up a committee that is going to be looking at issues around Westgate. The Israeli special forces came, and by the time they were leaving, we were there. But what I saw from the desire of Kenyans was just that volunteer nature, the desire to want to come and contribute and donate blood, contributions of blanket, food items, because there are people who fainted, they needed medical care. The number of hospitals that also volunteered staff. Java Sarit gave us coffee twice a day for the rest of the operation. Actually, from the second day, because we had forces there. We had Kenya Defense Forces officials and police officers who were conducting the operation in turns, and they needed food. We were calling for Kenyans to volunteer food items. And in our parking lot at Peponi Road 7, we actually made up a unit for KDF to set up the operation details. I was getting in touch of, getting first-hand experience with guns, artillery, and all these things, even how they get assembled. And it looked quite impressive to me. But when they got into Westgate and came back, oozing off blood, some of them even lost their lives, having been shot. And there are people that we interacted with. It felt quite difficult and hard for us. But I can be confident and say that Kenya has made very significant strides. And luckily enough, beyond the Dusit 2D of 2019, I don't think we have experienced very heavy terrorist attacks based on, of course, what we'll discuss in the next phases. But I believe that Kenya has made very significant responses, even in terms of policy issues. There are a number of laws that have been reformed. There are a number of policies, a number of issues that also bring in the citizens, because initially they said security is more or less like a closed secret. But today we have aspects like frameworks that present citizens at the forefront of being champions of anti-terrorism and the war against terror. So I'll be able to share some of the work that we're also doing with the National Counterterrorism Center, Ministry of Interior, county governments, and largely even citizens, how they are involved in these particular aspects.
So we've had OSIDO's actually countdown of what happened to him. In the US, of course, there's always the story about where were you during 9/11. For some of us, of course, at this particular age, Westgate, I will remember I was at home. I know even who was actually holding fort on Citizen TV at that particular time. It was Mwakazi who was, you remember. And sad as that may be, probably, where were you then? You don't look so old anyway.
Yeah, I may not look so old. During the Westgate attack, we were in Nakuru. We had on that 20th, there was a cadet commissioning parade that was at the Kenya Military Academy, and the events preceding this commissioning parade, there were a lot of security issues here and there. And you remember very well that the Al-Shabaab were attacking any people picketing anywhere, or any people crowded in one place. Now, that week, the president was the person that was presiding over that parade. So his security could not be taken into chances. And that is why we moved over to Nakuru for that week. I think we went to Nakuru 3 days before to cover the security of that event. Now, before we went to Nakuru, the issue of Westgate has some very hard truths and facts, because there's one thing I've dedicated a whole chapter in my book Tales of the War Front that entirely talks about the Westgate attack. And one of the hard truths is that the whole thing was known. It is something that could have been averted. It is something that there were intelligence reports that were out there. And the intelligence reports, we would not go into details because of reasons that we were very well know, but there were intelligence reports that had narrowed down to at least 3 malls, Westgate being one of them. So, being from the KDF, by law, we are secondary to police in internal operations. So, the legal thing to do was to pass over the information, all the intelligence information and reports that we had to the guys that would execute them, execute that. So by the time we were leaving Nairobi to Nakuru, all this had been done, and it was our prayer that the whole thing would be averted, because we are talking about 3 malls. We are not talking about all the malls in Nairobi. So you taking security measures to make sure that these 3 malls are secured was something that was doable. And we went to Nakuru, did the cadet commissioning went on very well. Then we were scheduled to return back to Nairobi on that Monday. So on that particular Saturday, the day of the attack, me and my colleagues, we woke up. It's a weekend. We are not on duty. So what do? We are young. We decided to go for a weekend outing in one of the resorts in Nakuru. And I remember we had just changed into our swimming gear, and then it is flashed on the screens that the Westgate has come under attack. So before we didn't even wait for any other information to come, because we knew the next thing is that we would be recalled back to Nairobi. So what we did at that point, we just left the resort and went back to KMA to wait for further orders. So after that, within 2 hours we were on our way back to Nairobi to support the operation. During this time is when whatever Kevin has shared was happening. The GSE Reke squad had moved in, but the operation was still being monitored, and the magnitude of this operation was beyond the GSE Reke. Yeah. So a decision was being made that we needed to deploy the special forces. This is a team of highly trained officers, some of the best trained officers we have across the continent, in close quarter battles. So during this time, these guys are based in Gilgil. So some military choppers were dispatched to convey them to Nairobi, and so by the time we were getting to Nairobi, the special forces had already arrived. They were waiting for deployment. So we got to Nairobi, set up an intelligence command center just at Westgate to continue to try to support the operation.
Okay, it's quite a difficult moment, of course, as we try to look at where we've been and where we've come up to so far. So now, I want us to take a little bit of time and just look at where we've come as a country. When the attack happened in 2013, of course, there was the hue and cry. The handling was not so well done. He's spoken about intelligence, but then the police actually insisted that what they had gotten from the intelligence community then was a lot of noise and that it was not actionable intelligence. Of course, since then, a lot of things have happened. And in the next 1 hour, we are going to look at that, see how we move on, and probably just help us sharpen this particular conversation. Number one, are we any better from where we were, OSIDO? Looking at the policy changes that we've made so far, starting from the police themselves, we now have got a dedicated ATPU, Unit Against Terrorism. We have got an updated private security framework. We also have actually upped the military and actually primed the military to actually work on this. Are we much better? Of course, we've gotten to a point where now we've even seen, the issue around terrorism, even the term terrorism in itself is a charged one. And I can even use it against you, especially for political reasons. Now, we see even the anti-terrorist police unit, for example, deployed in political cases and scenarios. We've seen them arrest Sonko, for example. We've seen them arrest Karmago. The 9 years after
Westgate.
Where are we as a nation?
Kenya is better. In fact, what you have described is the hardware infrastructure in terms of the operations, in terms of the intelligence from a security perspective, in terms of even the awareness and the levels of preparedness. In terms also of the legal and the policy frameworks. So Kenya has done quite well. And that is partly why, even as we speak now, the United Nations has opened and launched an office in Nairobi called the United Nations Office on Counterterrorism, UNOTC, which is supposed to now be the more or less like a benchmarking platform for countries around the region and also in the world. But if you look at what has informed all these processes, is based on the experience of Kenyans. And Kenyans decided to say that when we are dealing with issues around terrorism, we have to look at the hardware aspects and also the software aspects. So the software aspects aim to present spaces for citizens so that, for example, Bwana MUSAU spoke about the intelligence that was collected then. If you looked at the levels of citizen engagement in security, particularly terrorism, or violent extremism at that level, two things crop up. One is that it was more or less seen to be an Islamic-oriented narrative or ideology. And the expectation was that only people who are Muslims can either be radicalized or can be recruited into some of these terror or violent extremist groups. But if you look at, for example, the people who executed and who planned and executed Westgate and the consequent attacks, they are people of mixed religion, not necessarily Muslims, which therefore presents the aspect of the opportunity for us to now begin to look at the war on terror as not just a religious war, but much more of an ideological narrative that the violent extremist organizations and groups are bringing across and are actually recruiting almost everybody, not just the Muslims as was initially looked at. Number two is a level of awareness of the common citizen. And this is based on what you rightfully said, that the president told Kenyans, security starts with you. So today, Kenyans are much more aware because they have been told that there are certain characteristics that you look at. When, for example, your uncle is lost, when your son starts missing school, you must take action and you must begin to inform security apparatus or somebody who is close to them who can be able to help them open up and speak. And that comes a long way in terms of helping us collect intelligence, which therefore goes a long way in terms of preventing even some of these attacks, because those are the initial characteristics. The third thing, Maliba, is that the government is also aware about the what I would call the push and pull factors, or the drivers to radicalization, or that therefore leads to terrorism. And so if you look at some of the policy changes, particularly that relate to youth and employment, because that is one of the things that really bother young people in this country, the government has come up with some affirmative action funds, like access to government procurement opportunities, the 30% issue, doing tenders with government, issues around Youth Enterprise Development Fund and revamping it, issues around Uwezo Fund, Women Fund, and all those funds, with the objective that somehow it can be able to more or less lead towards shrinking the pool of those who are being radicalized. And so these are some of the softer approaches that the government, in my view, has been able to learn from certain angles of the attacks. Of course, from the, in addition to what I mentioned, the county action plans, which the president, the former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, made more or less like a directive that all counties must come up with a plan that will be able to bring in all stakeholders, so that terrorism or actions that lead towards terrorism are not just seen to be actions that relate to the security apparatus alone, but that anyone, including border, religious leaders, the mamamboga in the communities and in the villages, can also be able to have some say in terms of reporting. And we have seen many activities that are being done between civilians and the security apparatus, including soccer matches, including cleanups for certain towns, where then people would be made to feel that you are that the police officer is not your enemy. That security officer is not your enemy. You can actually walk to the police station, and before they ask you for evidence, when they could report a case, then they say, "We ingia ndani, because you are going to be our first suspect." But today, even the attitude of the police in terms of those who report cases has really changed. That is purely based on Kenya's intention to robustly enhance the aspect of intelligence gathering, information sharing, and also awareness creation. But if you look at what you mentioned from the hard approach, which therefore presents the aspects of infrastructure. Now, Kenya has proper training on for police officers, and we also have friends of Kenya, like the British High Commission, that has set up institutions in Nanyuki, for example, where we have seen Kenyan officers being trained on even how to detect bombs, that have been hidden under the soil, how they can be able to help citizens also to put in CCTV infrastructure around around certain infrastructure like that will require security. For example, embassies, big malls, like MUSAU is saying, even schools and the universities today, most of them have CCTVs and infrastructure that therefore enable them to gather information and is supposed to enhance response. Number two, of course, is the aspect of the private security. We have had a lot of trainings even for the private security personnel, because true to the fact, Maliba, is that when a terrorist walks into a building, the first person they encounter is a private security officer, other than banks and some heavily guarded places like, of course, some supermarkets, commissioners and government offices. In most of our institutions, the person you will meet is a civilian private security officer. And if they don't know how, for example, to conduct the traces, the checks, and all those, and basically how to conduct checks and what to look out for, then there's going to be a problem. So Kenya has moved in terms of being able to learn from our past, even the coordination of security personnel, like contrary to what we saw in Westgate, where there was a bit of confusion until when the military arrived, and of course Reke. We today have seen, for example, in Garissa, there was a bit of a problem as well. But in Dusit in 2019, we saw proper coordination where, for example, the police was able to determine how they communicate to the public, how they communicate among themselves, and even whether there was necessary need to have the military present. So in terms of coordination within security apparatus, I think that the country has also grown. And this is based on how confused we were in 2013, 9 years ago. And moving forward, other than the semblance of issues like the arrest of Sonko by ATPU, other than issues like, having ATPU personnel present in political rallies, which is really, I think that's a thumbs up, because again, political rallies are also very highly opportune prime spaces.
They could
where,
be, but my point was that we've actually seen the employment of this particular unit for purposes other than what they should be doing.
Correct.
Of course, if they are in a rally, sometimes we've got a rally is actually a very prime target. So it would be an easy one.
Yeah.
But what I'm talking about is that when you see them employed,
the excesses,
not excesses. Like you have got civilian issues that are not. They could be bordering on crime, but you see. You have got a corruption case, you bring in ATPU. You have got a basic issue, sometimes just a political issue, and you deploy them against your opponents to really sell
I think I agree with you that some of those could be excesses of maybe the person in charge and the desire to want to meet certain fear. Because you see the way ATPU is dressed, for example. There are people when they show up, they want to come as sissy, but when they put on those artifacts, then they get very scary. And I think those are some of the gaps which therefore we need to look into and even question why ATPU is being used to arrest people like Sonko, who probably have cases where other police units could actually be deployed. I know in Mombasa it has been a very big concern in terms of having ATPU present even in people's compounds when they are suspects. And those are some of the questions that from a civilian perspective people are asking. When do you deploy ATPU? Of course, it's anti-terror, but at what point do you determine that it is a terrorist act? Is it at the point of an explosion, an attack, or at a preventive level? So I'm sure that those are some of the conversations.
Of course, normally, in a policy cycle, you're going to find areas where you've got gaps and, of course, implications that were not thought of when you started, or rather when you initiated policy. You have got an IEBC-related case, you bring in ATPU. You have got Sonko giving you problems, you deploy ATPU. So, MUSAU, probably let's look at this. At the operational level, you spoke about the operation at Westgate having been beyond Reke squad. Yet, I can tell you that the nation does not believe that. A number of people still believe that the Reke squad has actually been, that particular unit is competent to handle literally anything. And that they handled it very well while in Westgate. Of course, the problem then was coordination. We've actually moved away from coordination problems and challenges. We now are at a place where there's cooperation. Coordination is much better. We have got a multi-agency coordination platform and a framework that helps out. But in Westgate, what really went wrong? Besides the intelligence that the police then insisted was not actionable. Of course, we saw a repeat of a Westgate type attack, of course, at Dusit too. Of course, Dusit and Westgate are almost similar. Not that the Garissa issue was any lesser because we paid quite a heavy human price in that. But then at Westgate, being this is the ground zero for where we are today in the last 9 years, what really was wrong? What went wrong? I'm not talking about now the before, now during.
I think what went wrong in Westgate, number one, is coordination. And during this time, this was the first, I think this was actually the first attack to happen during the Jubilee administration. And it shook them badly. And I think this thing caught them off guard. Number one, if you really remember very well, before the Reke squad came in, we had, I think it is the RDU of the AP.
Actually, there was a mix-up of forces from flying squad who were around, a little bit of RDU showing in, and any other police officer who was around, because initially it was reported as a robbery. And then the scale changed. So it kept on changing from a robbery, then to gunmen, and then soon, by the time now we come to the realization that this is something that is not a robbery, is not just gunmen, it's something bigger, it was way too late.
It was way too late, and this was the biggest undoing of this operation. Because by the time the police command was realizing this and bringing in the GSU Reke squad, a lot of damage had been caused. Lives had been lost. And when these people came, when the Reke squad came in, there was still a lot of confusion with the civilian officers, the officers in civilian uniform inside, and also you see, there's one thing that the public has to realize: you may be an officer, but you are not trained, you're not fit for a certain operation. You may be a doctor, you may be just a general duty officer, you may be an officer who is specialized on several other things other than what was happening at Westgate. But now getting these officers to relinquish what they were doing inside the mall, that was the first bit of coordination that lacked. Because at the entry of the Reke squad, which I do not say they are lesser than the special forces. That is what the Reke squad should have taken over the operation to lead from the front before the decision to deploy the military comes. That was the biggest lapse at the initial stage. Then when the entire operation was marred with lack of coordination on everything, because once the decision was also the next decision to be reached was to deploy the military. What happened when the military when the special forces were coming in, the Reke squad ought to have withdrawn from the front line to usher in these two. And then at that point, there's something that is very silly that played to the core, and this is the clash of egos. There had been bad blood between these two forces. You have heard this, that if you are a member of the KDF and the police find you in a club, they will haul you to the police station and call the military police and all that. So this bad blood played out during this operation, because at the time when the special forces were deployed, what was the reaction of the Reke squad? Shoot at our officers.
No, not really, because you see, the challenge with that is that everybody has got their own version of the story. Of course, at the risk of getting in and opening old wounds, of course, there was the argument. The Battle of Egos is an old one. I know that even today, in Kahawa, for example, the military towns, there is a side of Kahawa that a soldier is not supposed to be at some point, because if you're found on that particular side, then the police officers will get hold of you, then you are locked in. All of us know those cases where in Kahawa, let me speak about Kahawa, for example. Almost all of us have got relatives and little brothers and cousins, either in the force or in the police. So one time too many, we see a lot of egos. And I don't think that has also been the case in Langata a lot of times, where you find a lot of clashes between the soldiers and the police. But at a time like what we had in Westgate, will egos to that level, egos still be playing out? As in, was it even wise? I know we have gotten over that. As a nation, we are now doing much better. But I think the Reke squad side had actually done some very good work. Like you said, I think initially the problem was coordination. So when, like for example, the people who were hurt initially, I think the first casualties of the special teams that had gone in was actually on the Reke squad side, because they were fighting from different angles and the coordination was not synchronized. So, and again, who takes orders from the other one? You know the line of how things work out. I am a soldier, for example. You could be in a better position if you are a police officer. You actually have got intelligence and information that could be helpful. But how would a soldier, at that particular time, it was very difficult for a soldier, for example. And the guys we brought in from Gilgil, when we brought in the Rangers from Gilgil.
They were not Rangers.
The special forces.
They were special forces.
So when we brought in those guys from Gilgil, we are bringing in guys, and it's a mixed kind of operation. There is no framework of who takes orders from who. We even had got an Inspector General of Police holding his own AK-47 at the door and wanting to get in. That's just how bad things were.
That's, yeah. And this one thing. it was not necessary to have these two forces, the Recce Squad and the Special Forces at the scene at the same time, because these are two of the most elite forces in Kenya. So, the Recce Squad is the elite force in the senior most elite force in the police. Yeah. Same to the Special Forces, and they are equally highly trained in close quarter battles. So it was not necessary to have both of them at the scene at the same time. And number two, to answer to you, in matters of superiority, there is always the senior most person the senior most commander on ground, whether he comes from the police, prisons, or the military. That one doesn't matter. Who is the senior most officer on ground? And number three, about coordination, Arnold. The reality of the matter is, just compare what happened at Dusit and what happened at Westgate. Dusit was well coordinated from the start to the end, and that is why it was easier to contain it within a short time. Now, whether the clash of egos played out during the Westgate attack is true or not, from where I sit, that the clash of egos played out and the animosity between the two forces, because it is an open secret that these guys from the other end shot at the Special Forces, fatally wounding one of them, and these guys returned fire, killing one of the other guys on the other side, which was not necessary. There was a friendly exchange of fire.
But you know, one thing we know, of course, the Americans will call it blue and blue, but there is no friendly fire, because all fire kills, right?
So we say friendly because there are people who are not supposed to shoot at each other. Yeah.
Yes. But anyway, just a quick one. I think I've seen Ben Boss talking to us on Facebook. I have seen Oscar Sambuli. I've seen Collins Kibet, and even Gerard himself is speaking to us. And just guys out there, for those who are watching, please keep watching. I need to move now away from operational stuff. Sometimes I don't like talking about operational level matters, because it can really get murky. Because stories as told by those who are there, especially at the battlefront, have got ways of taking on forms and shape that you don't want to be part and parcel of. So, Kevin, let's talk about at the governance level, at the management level. We saw a cabinet secretary who, by all intents, and I'm bringing that because the deputy president should be coming up with his cabinet in
the president.
The president. All of us are having that problem with William. You know, William has been for the longest time been our deputy president. So somehow,
9 years actually.
Yeah, so it's still quite a challenge for some of us to actually accept that he's the president, but or rather the mind to sync up and accept that he is the president. So President William Ruto is expected to name his cabinet on his return from the US, probably tomorrow, Friday, but not going beyond next week.
Most likely Friday.
So with the lessons we learned on the other side, we saw Olelenku, a former guy from
the kitchen.
Not really the kitchen,
but it's the reality.
But a man from a different
training
was the minister
training
then.
and orientation.
Yeah. And he gave us all manner of what I can only call Majitu stories. In my language, what Olelenku was doing there was Majitu stories. And everybody was speaking his own language. I remember Amina saying that these guys, Amina, the CES for Foreign Affairs then, had her own thing. The public communication aspect of it was quite messed up.
Yeah.
We were not just mixed up at the operational level where the forces were shooting at each other, and we took so long. The media in itself didn't know how to communicate effectively. Today, the media actually has actually been shaped by the events that happened then. So, at the management level, I'm looking at how do we get, you remember when at that particular time the president had to swallow, do we call it
Pie.
the pie, and then crossed over to ODM, picked a seasoned military man for the late Kaiseri to actually take over that particular docket. As we move on at the management level, what are the lessons, for example, that William Ruto should not forget? You remember we had Omamo speaking, not Omamo speaking, we had Amina speak, we had Olelenku speak, we had even Matiangi. There was all manner of stuff, and the public communication bit of it, we didn't know who was saying what. And there were a lot of tales. About 16, 4, some of them who escaped. There was a tunnel. There was all manner of communication and a communication mix-up. So, from where we are, of course, William was part and parcel of this. So, from where are we? Including banning of mattresses.
The mattresses, well, the mattresses banned, but because we were there and we saw, even the day the CS came, I think the long and short of it, Maliba, is that as the president is seeking to get a lady or a gentleman whom he can be able to trust with security, particularly at that level, one of the things that we need to be wary about is a person who understands the technicalities of the operations. Not necessarily to the level of the fact that you must have gone to the trenches of being a military officer or whatever, but it would be a good thing to have a military officer, because if you look at developed nations, like the US, when they sit in that situation room, the people who sit there are not teachers and cooks who have been, transformed into security personnel. They are generals, they are lieutenant colonels, they are people who understand what it means, and they are there to brief the president. And that is basically, it's because of their own manner of experience, lessons they've learned, and indeed the degree of the degree and nature of the kind of operation. So for the sake of Kenya, I think the desire to get somebody who understands the journey that Kenya has walked, the lessons, the attacks, the terror issues, even the manner in which we respond to victims of terrorism. I don't know whether there's a mechanism to talk to them. We have military personnel who lose their husbands, they lose their wives. Who speaks to their families? I know within the military there is a social welfare department that tries to engage with them, because some of them, their kids have to be continuously trained and they have to be kept in schools. They have to be given food. They have to be given basic human needs and of course taken good care of. So as a president is looking for this lady or this gentleman, they have to focus. He has to focus on, one is that experience. Number two is ability to engage in a multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder arrangement. And here I mean, for example, public communication that you spoke about. Why was it so difficult for the CS to speak to the unit that has been set up by, Colonel Buluma, who was there and was in charge of the operation? We had colonels, lieutenant colonels like Rashid, who now is very, is sitting very highly in the military and is also still coordinating these anti-terrorism concerns. Why wasn't it so easy for the government, the Minister of Interior, to just walk in and knock the door of that particular unit and say, so what has been going on? Or even before the CS gets there, why not have a briefing session? So that, because you are going to Westgate, the media would want you to address them, the nation is probably looking for answers. Before you go and say, terrorists are burning mattresses, so we know there are 16, or there are 4, there are 2, or there is 1. Now there is a lady called,
20, there are 16.
That lady is called what? The Martha what? The white lady, the white widow, rather.
The white widow,
very many speculations and narratives. So the second characteristic of the person the president should be looking for is ability to engage other stakeholders. Don't look like you know it all, you can do it by yourself.
Why I'm asking that, Kevin, is because besides the cabinet secretary, the heads of different units that have actually been coordinating that, we have had quite a bloody, I want to say a bloody election, in that it's going to cost people careers.
Yes.
Including in places, for example, the ATP, for example, is under DCI, right? Within the DCI framework, you know that the leadership probably might not really sit pretty. Of course, it's easy to actually say that the campaigns are over, then we have to move on. But then, of course, the leadership, a section of the leadership of DCI probably does not sit pretty with the current administration.
Correct.
And during a handover, when we are moving from one regime to the other one, there is always that weakness that then the officers, or rather we can be caught napping. How then do we balance out between taking care of political issues? For example, you, Kevin, were the director of DCI, and when I'm actually running for president, you appear to frustrate me, for example. During that particular time, how do we then ensure that, and in future, can we, for example, insulate public officers away from politics? Because you have seen very senior military officers being dragged into spaces they should not be. We now have seen officers that hold very sensitive offices that should actually be quite apolitical, coming off as being partisan. So, and you know, we were moving from a Kibaki regime to a Uhuru regime, and there was this story about Kibaki period officers who were so entitled. So there was a lot of egos then, even at the management level. So how do we move away from that? We are also at a similar place today, lest we forget.
And that feeds into the issue of that public communication aspect, because there's what you do internally within your closed-door boardroom meetings, how you delegate responsibilities, how orders are given, and then there is the covert, what people see happening, including what is announced on media. That is going to really rest on the seat of the cabinet secretary. Because all these units, for example, DCI, DPP, all these NIS and others, fall under what is called, including others, fall under the NSAC, National Security Advisory Council, which is, of course, the one that briefs the president. Before you get to that level, there has to be some in-house issues, which in my view is the CS, so that even the PS should be seen to be that technocrat, but who is also willing to take instructions, execute orders of the cabinet secretary, but also not want to be seen to be a yes man or a yes woman for the CS. Because, for example, what we saw between Dr. Matiang'i and Dr. Karanja Kibicho were two gentlemen who are front runners in the battle. So you see them all speaking to the press. The CS will say this, the PS will say this. All of them are saying the same thing, but using the same level of energy, which in my view was a little bit problematic. Because then, at what point does the DCI, for example, the one that the example you're giving, at what point do the officers under the Directorate of Criminal Intelligence take instructions on what needs to be executed from the cabinet secretary, which is supposed to be implemented by the principal secretary? It's a bit of a confusion. We have the State Officers Act and public officers. Of course, the Constitution is very clear around their involvement in politics. It is supposed to be red and blue, black and white. You are a state officer, this is political, it is off for you. For cabinet secretaries, because they are appointees of His Excellency the President, we expect that they should be able to be people who can at any time defend the president, which is why, for example, it might be very difficult for the president to pick up people who opposed him. I don't foresee. But for technical personnel, for example, PSS, directors, and other officers, I don't think there should be a problem in terms of him throwing the net wide and looking for people who are very well skilled, very well educated in that particular sector and area, and people who are able to deliver. Because what Kenyans are looking for at the end of the day is deliverables, the delivery aspect. Services are being delivered, we are secure, and government is doing its sole responsibility to implement programs, strategies, and projects that therefore lead towards people being confident that we have a government in place. Now, when we talk about security, and particularly anti-terrorism concerns, the president will have to learn from the past. And for me, I think President Uhuru Kenyatta set up, based on lessons from Westgate, Garissa attack, and then the Dusit attack, he was able to learn lessons that therefore made it very easy for Kenya to be safe and secure. Even at the border areas, we have the border police units that also work with the military, the Kenya Defense Forces. But if you look at how information is passed, up to the point at which the county commissioner says, we now want to talk to Nairobi to send us reinforcement, is very, there are levels of verification, communication, until when they realize this cannot be able to be handled by either the border police unit or the common police officer, the administration police or general service unit, and then they call for reinforcement. The president will have to look for that individual who is able to bring in all these units to the table, have conversations. And one thing which I don't think we have done well as a country, Maliba, is feedback. At what point does the NIS sit with the DCI and sit with the KDF, for example, and sit with GSU or even REKE to have a reflection moment, where they give them, they're able to share even their own frustrations? Because I can imagine how frustrated sometimes they get when you are the officer on the ground. You are seeing things that you're supposed to be responding to, but you must wait for a call, a green light for you to either shoot or retreat back. So the president, in my view, for him to sustain the gusto that President Uhuru Kenyatta set up, particularly for security, he has to be wary about a number of indicators and a number of things that also border on policy and legal frameworks, because Kenya is a democracy.
Well, I know there is an existing framework, of course, how the institutions work, but how do you expect NIS, for example, to sit down with guys and discuss with them? Being the silent service,
of course.
The basic definition of a spy has always been that a spy is anyone seated anywhere, or not seated. A spy is anyone, anywhere, at any particular point, doing anything. So including people who could be here, seated here.
Yeah. and you see, they are seated there picking information that is expected to be reported for action to be taken. So the person they are reporting to, because NIS will not go and arrest someone, for example. They have to pass that information, and that information has to be credible, because Article 49 of the Constitution also talks about the rights of an arrested person. So if they issue false information and you arrest me, you sue the state. But so that's the kind of conversation that I'm talking about.
And that is one problem. I'm just about to bring in MUSAU, but you will think about that when you do a response. For a lot of politicians and the people in public service, they feel like a lot of our intelligence agencies are actually just obsessed with finding out who is sleeping with who is doing what. They are not doing the critical work.
That's right.
Actually, if you ask the politicians, they have got a very funny idea about what our using them as goons to go around and threaten people and such like stuff. So anyway,
no problem.
MUSAU, what do you speak to the frameworks, the challenges we've had, and then how politics actually affect how the security apparatus actually eventually function, knowing too well that we are in a handover period?
Before I respond to that, this one, before it escapes my mind, there's something that Kevin has said, which I want to correct. There is no officer, if you're in a situation, you don't wait for any order from anyone to shoot or to act. You are trained well enough to make an informed decision. The only control line here is that you make sure that the decision that you're making will not land you into problems afterwards. You don't use excessive force, and you don't just take an unnecessary decision. And number two, on the coordination of the KDF, the DCI, and the NIS, I would say this: every force has its own intelligence agency. The police has the DCI, which has also some of their officers in almost everywhere. We have the NIS. We have the Directorate of Military Intelligence also. These state intelligence agencies coordinate themselves very well. They relay information between each other. But for action purposes, information is disseminated on one principle, which is known as need to know basis. For example, you are an AP commander. He's the police commander, the general police command, the regular police command. Whatever, or an OCS, whatever information that we have, the action that we needs to be taken by the OCS. There is no business looping you in. For that intelligence information to be protected and to be effective, it has to be disseminated to the right person who acts. And about how we organize ourselves and manage everything from the security front kutoka pale chini. There's one thing that we need to understand. The security setup is so robust. We have sub-county security committees, we have county security committees, and regional security committees, which sit and address issues before we come to the national front. Now, where we have a major problem is at the national level. And this is where now I'm coming to answer to your question. One of the false starts of the Jubilee administration was picking the wrong people for the internal security and the police. Like you have mentioned, Kimeyo at Westgate with a G3 and an helmet. That photo is one of the widely circulated photos on Nene. It shows somebody who is so clueless about what was happening at that time.
You don't say he's clueless when he was the director of operations at the...
he was the director.
At Vigilance House for a very long time.
But in what capacity? That is what Nene. And now we have had a tendency. I also heard him say that we need now that the president is about to appoint his cabinet, that we may need somebody from the military at internal security or at defense. I don't think, to me, from where I sit, that may not be necessary.
And I will actually back that because Matiang'i is...
Matiang'i was not from... was a lecturer. Yeah, and he performed so well, apart from the small interferences from the state. But what is needed for the internal security cabinet secretary and the defense is somebody who understands what needs to be done, and somebody who is firm with their decisions. You understand? If you go back, just anybody can go back and listen to the speeches, the addresses that Olelengu was giving during the Westgate attack, and you will wonder how this guy had even made it to that point.
He's a second-term governor.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then there's another thing. You have never seen a CDF, the Chief of Defense Forces, coming from NIS or civilian or something. That post always rotates within the Kenya Defense Forces. And one of the biggest, there is a feeling in the police. You know, you rise up the ranks, you have gained all the experience that you need. You have honed your skills and expertise. You've gone back to school, added gotten all the academic qualifications that you need, and then the highest level you can rise to the police is a deputy IG. Then the IG comes from somewhere.
But just a moment. Apart from Ali, the former commissioner. Ali under Kibaki, of course, it's Kibaki who brought in this idea of poaching from elsewhere and assuming that the police is so rotten that you cannot have an insider bringing in the change you need. Of course, Ali brought in some desirable change. Of course, it didn't always go the right way. Then, of course, there was Boynet from NIS. And then now we've had Mutiembai from NIS. Though for Mutiembai, I still believe he's a former police officer. So that wasn't so much of an outsider. He's just a man who had come back home.
He's a man who had come back home. But the entire force will always view him as an outsider. If we could have that, there are qualified police officers who can take up the role of an IG. If that post could be reserved for them. And the other thing that I would want to address is the political interference in security operations. During the last regime, we have witnessed, and I really welcome the statements by the Deputy President that there will now you will not now you can conduct your business without worrying whether the police are on your back or something. Because I mean, we have gotten support to train the ATPU to become one of the best units in Africa. But now, how do you use them? Chasing Sonko around, chasing politicians and harassing people who have a dissenting view. Which to me...
Well, I think when the deputy president was speaking about people being able to work without necessarily working in a toxic context, is that there are parastatals in this country where you have got interns you think are really interns, but they are DCI guys.
Yeah.
So, and they're very interested in what you're printing. I have heard, of course, CEOs and directors in parastatals say you somehow find this particular system where you are brought public, quote unquote, PAC, vetted interns, but these guys are just interested in what you're typing on your phone, what you are printing, what you have shredded, and everything else. Of course, creating a very toxic environment. At some point,
there are also other people who during the other regime, their whole business was now to tap into your calls.
Your calls and
if you become a person of interest, which to me that expertise should be used usefully to combat what it was intended for, not to intimidate people who oppose you.
Okay, so we've looked at that. Just before we go back to where we should actually be looking at this conversation, we've got about 30 minutes to go. The costs of coming to where we are today. You know, we have got a fence. I'm told that even where has Nezaruka fence? It was created, and somehow that fence costs us a little bit of a good a chunk of money. We've gone into so much in the name of reforming the police, or rather the security infrastructure. We've gone into so much. We've really invested in a lot, of course, including even changing the police uniform. Of course, everything else came from a paper somewhere, a proposal that we were reforming the police and coming up with the whole security.
Of course, yeah.
We've done away with the older guns now. We've got some newer, smarter guns. And we've put in so much resources that have gone into this. Was it worth it?
It was.
Would we have done it much easier?
Yeah.
Like, for example, you have got that small team, the ATPU team, a small, smart unit that is actually so good at what they're doing, by the way. Other than once they are abused by for political purposes, the team is quite good.
Yeah.
And I need to say this even before we move on. Al-Shabaab, of course, at strategic level, they've actually been defeated. We still do not have the types of Peketoni style. Actually, I have worked in Mogadishu, and I will tell you that in Mogadishu, also on the other side, our partners have worked so well. The Somali National Army, the SNA, has become so good at what they do that Al-Shabaab cannot stand up and face SNA. In fact, there's a joke, an officer in Somalia who told me in Mogadishu at some point that Al-Shabaab has got ease of operating outside of Somalia than they can actually operate within Somalia. You've seen what has happened in the last few days, that villagers and the SNA are giving Al-Shabaab a serious beating. So Al-Shabaab is all in all actually defeated, but then of course they are not that they've lost the potential to actually cause scares and a little harm here and there. But if you look at the cost we put in, knowing too well that the security sector is not quite open to vetting, wouldn't we still have achieved that? Because if you look at what happens, the ATP, for example, good leadership, robust equipment that doesn't have to cost so much. If you see what we've put into this, and most of it cannot be accounted for.
Yeah.
We've got a small, smart team, yes, doing well,
Yeah.
but you look at the money that has gone in, for example, and there's a mismatch between how much we've put in and
Yeah.
our neighbors. Like, for example, Somalia, I'm saying that because I've worked for Somalia, even consulted for the government of Somalia, for the federal government of Somalia. I'll tell you this, that you see the resources they are putting in to beat Al-Shabaab at home, where Al-Shabaab should, quote unquote, be more brazen and stronger. You cannot compare with the resources we here in Kenya are putting in.
The investment is worth it, in my view. The only challenge we have as a country is corruption. Because why, for example, some of those artillery and equipment should be overpriced? compared to what other countries have is a question of corruption and to whose benefit. And so looking at the intelligence around investment in security, it is proper, is 100% in my view. But the degree of interference, particularly when it comes to overpricing, when it comes to kickbacking, when it comes to just why it should be that expensive, which in fact is a problem that we have in our procurement in this country, in almost all sectors, whether it's agriculture, whether it is water, whether it is education and CBC. It's such a big problem, which I hope that this administration, President William Ruto's administration, is going to be very keen and wary about. And the other bit of it, of course, is investment in software, the soft approaches, the attitude of the citizens, the ability to navigate around information and intelligence. Like we've been making this joke around some NIS officers in some government offices. How possible can it be that we make all Kenyans NIS, against radicalization and terrorism, so that we train Kenyans on what they need to be looking out for? And that's part of what the county action plans and the county engagement forums are actually supposed to be doing and are doing. So like tomorrow, we have a meeting for the county engagement forum for Nairobi that is headed by the county commissioner and co-chaired by the governor, and brings together all stakeholders sitting together and talking about communication and information around security and particularly prevention of violent extremism and therefore terrorism. The investment that we do in public education and public awareness is so low, Arnold, compared to what we are talking about, equipment for military, the police, and all that.
We spend so much in kinetics.
Correct.
The hard force.
Correct.
And do very little on the software front, where those other alternatives are actually more effective.
Exactly.
And cost effective as opposed to actually employing the
because
kinetics.
The equipment is for response.
Yes.
You will not respond when there is no
It's
attack.
too late.
Yeah, it's too late.
Yeah.
But we don't put a similar amount of money and investment on the preventive aspects, which, in my view, should be the areas where we are actually supposed to be spending a lot of money. So it's one of those things that whoever comes as a cabinet secretary for Interior should be concerned about. That how can we be able to empower and activate Kenyans across the country to be able to, even characterize a radicalized person. The kind of conversations that we have online when you are in a house and your son or your daughter is hiding and is watching certain videos or certain movies, or always has to excuse him or herself during dinner or lunch times to go and receive this phone call. How do we begin a conversation, with this kind of individuals? I don't think as a country we have really invested in that kind of in that kind of a framework or that kind of a structure where we have very candid conversations around how to protect the country, as opposed to investing in buying guns, buying artillery, Of course, there is that positive aspect of it, like we see during national holidays, or sometimes, the artillery being paraded and we show the world how strong we are. There is much more in doing it in another way, as opposed to showing the world what we have. Those fighter jets being thrown up there, and it's a good thing. But in terms of in my view, in terms of the preventive aspects, we need to put an equal measure of that kind of energy and amount of money in training and educating Kenyans. There's been this big debate around private security. We already spoke about it, and borrowing from countries like Uganda, where their private security guys have guns. And you want to give a gun, for example, in Kenya, to someone who is so stressed, is very frustrated, is really worried about,
you see, for example, the threats we face, do they really care whether we are stressed or not?
They don't. But you see, when the point of a response, when you are responding to an attack, it means there are certain gaps that have been evaded.
We had
over
guidelines
here
to ensure that private security officers have got guns. But the argument was that if you are going to give private security guards guns, you will be arming one community. I just want to bring in MUSAU very fast.
But remember, even as you talk about those guidelines, we also have we also have the county policing unit guidelines that more or less tend to empower the non-police or the non-security officers, including citizens, now to look at security as something that also concerns them. Even when you leave your house and you are walking into that bus station, how aware are you around your surrounding? When you are seated in a room like this, do you know how many exits you have, for example, in a hall or a mall or in a supermarket? Do you know your next exit in case there is an attack? How do you navigate around that? In case there is a shooter, Kevin OSIDO could just get off his gun and start shooting people aimlessly. How do you respond to an active shooter? Those, and if you look at the UK, for example, the US, countries like even Rwanda, closer home, Israel, those are basics, trainings that people go through in terms of just their awareness.
I really want to bring in Prince,
Yeah.
but I will still argue that the concept of a good guy with a gun being out, or rather drowning the bad guys with guns, that concept has not really worked well in the US, for example,
Yeah.
where a lot of guns, we see a lot of shootings, and that concept and the argument of guns, more guns, actually like good guys with guns taking care of the bad ones, has not worked.
Which is
Because
what
a
I'm
lot of
saying,
times, if
that
you look at
Kenya
the
has
response-
invested a lot in buying guns as opposed to dealing with the software issues.
kinetics
Attitude of people, the personal responsibility. I don't have to have a gun to show that I am so powerful.
to actually be secure,
Ability
actually.
to talk to people and calm them down, like we saw this GSU officer doing with young people in 2007. He had a gun, but he chose to engage in a dialogue. It changes a lot of
since I grew up in
reactions.
Huruma, I will tell you about that story. But then Prince, talking about the cost, the equipment, the hard force, and everything else, and generally the corruption that comes with security. You know, when you securitize the budgeting process, and you can't ask questions, of course, the budget's actually confidential and everything else. And then if you have been lucky, like some of us, to actually work with foreign governments, then you realize that they're not putting in as much as we are doing, but the results are there for everybody to see. How do we get out of this trap?
First, on the issue of corruption, and I think the reason why the military is not audited is to prevent overexposing them. But I have always wanted to believe that these people can be held into account. These discussions can be held in camera. Those discussions should not be exposed to people out here, because I have seen situations. I have been in the forces. I have seen situations where we have bought equipment. The equipment doesn't work, and we are talking about equipment worth billions of shillings. And you will not tell me that somebody flies to an overseas country and orders something that is 40. That tells you money must have changed hands somewhere. So something, if now we're talking about policies or something, a policy must be designed to be able to hold the procurement officers and the top cream of the military into account on whatever investment that they make. That is my view. But I would want to strongly rebut something that Kelvin has brought in about building the kinetics and the capacity. This one is very important, because one thing, if you are a strong army and you have highly trained professionals, any other person out there who wants to come to engage you in a fight or something, they will have to take stock, and their chances.
You see, that is deterrence by posture.
Yeah.
Looking like you are dangerous.
Yeah.
But here we are dealing with an ideological problem, and no one is
I am
actually
coming to
opposed
that.
to building kinetics.
Yeah.
What we are saying is that the cost, we're
The
actually talking about
investment
the
is
cost,
too
the
high.
investment that is actually putting vis-a-vis the output.
I think
And I've just given you an example,
Yeah.
that if you look at the investment that has actually been put into the SNA, the Somali National Army,
Yeah.
vis-a-vis what we've put in, our budget by far dwarfs the region. I'm not talking about even EAC. Our budget, our security budget, by far dwarfs. Yet, to be honest, You know, these are conversations we don't want to have as a people.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, we have got the smallest army
Yeah.
in the region, yet the biggest budget in the region. And you're talking about equipment, probably you do not want to hear this particular conversation. Our neighbors, for example, in Uganda, have got 4.5 generation jets, for example. We have got second generation, 50-year-olds that could drop anytime from the sky. So, niza kutisha tu zinaenda faster, but if you have got an F5 Tiger and your neighbor on the west has got Su-30 MKI, those are 4.5 generation. As in, they are so close to F-35.
Arnold, this is my response to you.
Kenya
I
remains
have
strong.
been in the battlefield,
Yeah.
and honestly, you cannot compare the Kenyan Defense Forces with Uganda
I have
by
not
far.
compared. I have not compared, but I have had the opportunity
But,
to work in a battlefront zone in different capacities. And I'll tell you one thing. You know, I say this in politics, that hope is not a strategy. Our sharpest tool as a country is diplomacy. MFA for us has done, tunajiteteaga na mdomo hiyo tuko sawa. We've never had a serious enemy confront us. So I would not want us to discuss that particular end. But I just want to say that if you look at our neighbors in the south, for example, an army that is almost 5 times bigger than ours, but the mankind counts as the manpower counts for something, and you look at their budget, is way smaller than ours.
Yeah.
In the West, 3 times, 4 times bigger than ours. And we know what our guys are paid and what kind of equipment they have. What I'm just trying to tell you is that, and we will always argue that and it's not just in the military. Some